much for being here. I'm glad you all remembered to set your clocks forward an hour. If anybody walks in at the end, will know that they forgot. I see a couple clocks actually already that need to be
We'll get you.
And this is actually my second year in a row giving a presentation here on Spring Forward Sunday, and so I guess it's now officially an annual tradition. And we're already booked for next year, so 3 years running, keep it going from there. Maybe we could like call it Spring Forward with Hamilton College history or something like that. A little kitschy like that.
Katz.
Yeah, that's right, Katz. But the topic at hand here today is the Elihu Root Papers at Hamilton College. The first half of the presentation will be the life and legacy of Elihu Root, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then we're going to be talking about specifically the Elihu Root Papers at Hamilton College and the college archives. And more specifically, a project that was undertaken through a cross-campus partnership with the Levitt Center, Dean of Faculty, and the History Department to process the papers, create an exhibition, using the papers as well as outside sources, and then also bringing a couple of speakers to campus on topics related to Elihu Root. So let's jump right in with his Elihu Root's early life and upbringing. This may be not something new to some of you, but hopefully it'll be a refresher. And for those who don't know his story, this will provide important context, especially for the second half of the presentation. So Elihu Root was born on February 15th, 1845 in Buttrick Hall to Orrin Root, who was a Hamilton College class of 1833, and to Nancy Buttrick Root. And so here is his father, Orrin Root, his mother, Nancy Buttrick Root. This is him as a young adult. And this is Buttrick Hall. And the reason he was born in Buttrick Hall is because his mother, Nancy Buttrick Root, was the daughter of Horatio Gates Buttrick, who was the caretaker at Hamilton College in the 1840s. And it was later renamed, that hall, the caretaker's home was named Buttrick Hall. And so his mother, Orrin Root at the time was actually teaching in Utica, but his mother had gone home to visit her family, and he was born on the second floor of Buttrick Hall. And in 1850, his parents, his father was hired by Hamilton College to be the mathematics professor, and the family purchased what was then now called the homestead, 1.5 acres of land on the hill. The land consisted of what was then Lee's Tavern, and was originally built in 1799 and enlarged in 1804 by Isaac Williams. And if you're interested in Isaac Williams, Sylvia Saunders wrote a book that's for sale up here about Isaac Williams, and she was deeply fascinated because also he built the Saunders home, as well as Lee's Tavern, which then became the homestead when the Root family purchased it in 1850. And what's interesting about the Root homestead, which is imaged there at the bottom, is that there was a ravine in the back of the house in the backyard that was previously used as a garbage dump. And so the family would spend time, they were very into horticulture, and so they would go through and clear out the trash in the ravine and beautify the space with gardens. And I imagine you know where this is going. That then became Root Glen. And I'm representing Root Glen on my shirt today. And so as a youth, Elihu grew up, within this culture of going and clearing out what became Root Glen. And what's also interesting is that the family had a relationship with Asa Gray, and Asa Gray would send them plants. The famous botanist from Sequoia, and he would send plants. There's an Asa Gray bed at Root Glen, one of the most beautiful places on campus today. Elihu was educated at Clinton Grammar School. He also studied at the Williston Seminary before he matriculated to Hamilton College in 1860, and he graduated as valedictorian in 1864. Just to give you a sense of the Root homestead, you may remember this from my talk last year about the Kirkland College records. This is College Street here. This is Griffin Road. This is then Hamilton College. And this is the homestead here, this 1.5 acres. Throughout Elihu Root's lifetime, he amassed 60 acres of land surrounding the homestead. And this land traces its roots all the way back to the original Kirkland patent to Samuel Kirkland. And it was gifted to Hamilton College. It was bequested to Hamilton through Elihu Root and given to Hamilton in 1960 through his daughter-in-law, Grace Cogswell. And so this land eventually became the land in which Kirkland College was built. So when Elihu Root was at Hamilton from 1860 to 1864, I should say, when he gave a public address in 1912 reflecting on the 100-year history of Hamilton College and his time at Hamilton College, he said, quote, "I wish to say something about the college that can be illustrated by reference to a group of teachers who were here 50 years ago, my own father, Warren Root, and his son, Warren Root Jr., who in succession filled the chair of the mathematics in the college for 58 years, Edward North, professor of Greek for 48 years, Charles Avery for 25 years, professor of chemistry, C.H.F. Peters, the astronomer, for 32 years in the Litchfield Observatory, and Anson Judd Epson for 21 years as professor of rhetoric. For a boy to live with such men and to be close to them during 4 of the most impressionable years of life, to observe and become accustomed to their simple and sincere lives, made happy by the pleasures of the intellect. This is an education beyond price, and this is the true story of Hamilton." And for Elihu, this is even more than just the 4 years that he was a student. He really grew up in this atmosphere, this academic atmosphere, surrounded by some of the brightest people of the era. There's a neat little aside story here about his father. So his father, in 1850, when he started teaching at Hamilton, he was all hired by the federal government as a weather observer, and they gave him equipment to take 3 readings a day, and also paid him $50 a year to do these meteorological readings 3 times a day. So this is another picture of the homestead. This little weird, out-of-place, whatever you want to call it, little sunroom was built specifically so he could do his outdoor readings. And the notebook that he accumulated these readings for 30 years, from 1850 to 1880, still exists in the college archives. And Professor Aaron Strong and his students are using that data to compare it to meteorological data today to see how the climate has changed. And I can just imagine, I love this picture because there's a group of people on the porch here, and I can just imagine Elihu Root there or on the other side of the wall listening to the conversation, informing his what would become his career. So immediately following graduation, the 19-year-old Root taught for 1 year at the Rome Academy. His brother, Warren Jr., was the principal there, and one of Elihu's students was future Hamilton College president Malcolm Woolsey Straker. I'll be talking about him again in just a minute. After his year teaching at the academy, he moved to New York City to pursue a law degree at NYU. And in 1867, Root received a Bachelor of Law degree and was admitted to the bar. For a year, Root worked under a law firm, Mann & Parsons, in an unpaid apprenticeship before he opened his own firm. He opened with a firm with Alexander Compton called Compton & Root. Their firm represented banks, railroads, and even the notorious Tweed ring. They're named after William Tweed, better known as Boss Tweed. And this ring controlled controlled the Tammany Hall political machine, which had bankers and businessmen, judges, politicians, kind of all under their influence. So in July of 1873, Boss Tweed was brought to trial for embezzlement with one of his co-defendants who was related to Compton's wife. And so Compton recused himself, and Root took charge of the case. And Root, of course, got raked in the press for representing the Tweed, Boss Tweed. And he displayed really great acuity for the law, but Tweed was still sentenced to pay very heavy fines. But during his time as a young lawyer, Root was very active in the Union League Club, which is where he became involved in politics, and particularly the Republican Party. He met his future father-in-law there, as well as Chester Arthur. And in 1880, Arthur was elected Vice President of the United States with Root's support. If you've seen Death by Lightning, you know that Nick Offerman portrays Chester Arthur in the not-so-flattering light. But Root was actually, he attended the inauguration. He actually was among some of the friends in Chester Arthur's home when he found out that President Garfield had succumbed to a bullet from the assassin, and that Chester Arthur was now President of the United States. And many thought that Root was going to be offered a cabinet position under Chester Arthur, but he actually appointed him to the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And it was in this role that he got his first taste for international law. He prosecuted 2 cases for the violation of the United States neutrality laws against vessels for aiding Haitian and Colombian insurgents, and defended the government in the head money cases that challenged the Immigration Act of 1882 on grounds that it conflicted with international treaties with the Netherlands. The suit went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where the Root and the US government were successful. He quietly submitted his resignation to President Grover Cleveland on July 1st, 1885, and returned to private life to assist with his practice. Now, Root was going about his private life until the USS Maine sunk off the coast of Cuba in 1898, sparking the Spanish-American War, which resulted in the U.S. attaining control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. And on the heels of the war, in July of 1899, President William McKinley offered Root a position in his cabinet as Secretary of War. And the war had been successful in general, but Secretary Russell Alger had come under criticism for his handling of the department, and McKinley had requested his resignation. And at first, Root declined. He didn't have any military experience. He had tried to enlist in the Civil War when he was a student at Hamilton and was rejected because he had a kind of a frail appearance to him. But then he did reluctantly accept when he realized that McKinley needed a lawyer to run the governments of the islands. And upon inheriting the War Department, Root sought out to fix the department's administrative and efficiency problems through modernization by creating a general staff. He also drafted the Army Reorganization Act, which passed Congress in February of 1901. The act provided for an enlargement of a permanent army. That same year, he established the Army War College and the War College Board, which was designed to develop the Army's educational system and study military policy. In 1903, Root's General Staff Act passed, creating the position of Chief of Staff, and established a general staff of 44 officers who would serve 4-year terms. He also expanded West Point. This is a picture this is kind of a neat stereo card picture of the cabinet of President McKinley, and here's President McKinley, and Root is over there. But Root's primary objective as Secretary of War was to handle the governments of Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. He was the main architect behind the Foraker Act in 1900, which established a civilian government in Puerto Rico. It created Puerto Rican citizenship. This should not be confused with U.S. citizenship, but a distinct citizenship of an unincorporated territory of the U.S. It also imposed tariffs for goods between the U.S. and Puerto Rico. And while Root found it necessary to establish a civilian government in Puerto Rico, he did not favor the complete integration of Puerto Rico into the U.S. He thought it would dilute the electorate. He believed the U.S. should also not relinquish Puerto Rico because of its strategic importance in the region, and particularly the defense of Panama Canal, which was under construction. In Cuba, Root's primary objective was to prepare the Cuban people for self-government. Root drafted the Platt Amendment in 1901, which stipulated the conditions for U.S. intervention in Cuban affairs and permitted the U.S. to lease or buy lands for the purpose of establishing naval bases, the main one being Guantanamo Bay, so quite a legacy there. And in the Philippines, war raged between American troops and Filipino forces. And Democrats and anti-imperialists criticized the McKinley administration for the perpetration of atrocities in the Philippines, and it was Root's chief task to handle this campaign issue. William Jennings Bryan, who was McKinley's Democratic opponent in the presidential election in 1900, favored Philippine independence, while McKinley and Root insisted that Filipinos were incapable of self-government, and that a self-governing Filipino Commonwealth was only possible through American occupation. I'll be talking about that a little bit later too. We highlight some things from the Root collection. Now, after his term of Secretary of War ended in 1904, Root returned to private practice at the age of 59. But when Secretary of State John Hay died in 1905, Teddy Roosevelt named Root as Hay's successor. And here is a picture of Teddy Roosevelt's cabinet, and to his right hand is Secretary of State Elihu Root. And as Secretary of State, Root sought to cultivate friendly relationships with Central and South American countries to clear the way for American commercial expansion in the region. Root handled the relations between the U.S. and Central American countries in accordance with Roosevelt's prioritization of the Panama Canal, and developed specifics and details and policy applications for Roosevelt's corollary, which was expanding the Root-Monroe Doctrine, asserting that the right of the U.S. to intervene in Latin American affairs. And now we have the Don-Roe Doctrine to go on top of that. In 1906, Root embarked on a tour of South America, where he met with various presidents and government officials from Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Peru, Panama, Colombia, and Mexico, hoping to persuade these countries to participate in the 1907 Hague Peace Conference. In 1908, Root negotiated an agreement with Japan, which affirmed the United States open door policy in China and maintained free trade and equal opportunities between the U.S. and Japan. The agreement involved Japan's recognition of the American annexation of Hawaii and the Philippines. In return, America would recognize Japan's control over Manchuria and Korea. And also Japan promised to limit Japanese immigration to the United States. Now, when Root finished his term as Secretary of State in 1909 at the age of 64, he stated that he did not seek the office of senator, but he would reach the position if the legislature elected him. If you remember, prior to the 17th Amendment's adoption in 1913, senators were selected by their state legislators, not directly by people's votes. And so Root's candidacy was championed by the Union League Club, who adopted a strong resolution in favor of his candidacy and appointed a committee to promote his election. And in 1909, Root was sworn in as Senator of New York. Root's time as Senator was uneventful compared to his times as Secretary of War and Secretary of State. In 1910, Root supported the Income Tax Amendment, which was ratified as the 16th Amendment. He opposed the direct election of senators, as I mentioned, but it was ratified as the 17th Amendment. Root disliked the 18th Amendment and the idea of prohibition. He did not like that a legislative act could regulate his personal habits. Root also opposed women's suffrage and the 19th Amendment, which we'll be talking about again when I highlight things from the collection. But he did support intervention rather than isolationism and neutrality when World War I broke out in 1914. Now, Root left Congress in 1915 after his 6-year term and retired to Oneida County. However, friends such as Andrew Carnegie and other Republican politicians encouraged him to run for presidency in 1916. He argued that he was too old to be president, but he was persuaded into campaigning. And actually, this is a campaign pin from 1960, and we have a handful of those in the archives. And at the 1916 Republican Convention in Chicago, Root received 103 votes on the first ballot of the nomination, but eventually it went to Charles Hughes, who subsequently lost to Woodrow Wilson. The following year, President Wilson commissioned Root to lead a diplomatic mission to Russia to ensure the new government would continue to fight Germany in World War I, following the revolution that overthrew Tsar Nicholas II. The mission was unsuccessful as Root underestimated the Bolsheviks, who then overthrew the provisional government later that year and signed a peace treaty with Germany in 1918. And from 1918 until his death in 1937, Root stayed active in public life as an elder statesman. He remained president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace until 1925, a position he held since 1910. He remained president of the Board of Trustees at Hamilton College until his death, a position he held since 1912. He became one of the founders of the American Law Institute along with Taft and Hughes. He was president of the American Bar Association. The kind of list goes on. There's a significant amount of things he stayed active until his death.
Is your speaker off?
I'm sorry.
Okay, your speaker isn't on.
Did it come up? Can you hear me?
Something just happened.
Oh no.
Just happened. You must have known.
Test, 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 test. I could also just project too. That's fine. That's fine. I'll talk louder. So Elihu Root passed away on January 27th, 1937. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And he was buried in the Hamilton College Cemetery. So I mapped it between Buttrick Hall and the cemetery where he's buried. It's 0.2 miles. It's a 5-minute walk. So you may think, oh, he didn't really make it that far in life. He did a lot in this 0.2 miles. So what is the legacy of Elihu Root? Well, he was a legal and administrative grandmaster. He professionalized the U.S. Army. He designed the legal framework for territorial possessions. He modernized the State Department, negotiated 24 treaties, and favored arbitration over war, which actually won him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1912, especially for his work as Secretary of State. He was a trustee of Hamilton College from 1883 until 1937, his passing. He was chairman of the board from 1912 to 1937. At the time of his passing, he was the longest serving trustee and also the longest serving president of the Board of Trustees, chairman of the board, I should say. And he was the first president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Going back to his time as trustee at Hamilton College, his tenure as trustee overlapped significantly with President Stryker's. Malcolm Woolsey Stryker, who I mentioned, was one of his students when he taught his first year out of Hamilton College. Malcolm Woolsey Stryker was hired as president of Hamilton College in 1892 and served until 1917. And this was a really pivotal time in Hamilton College's history. It was during his presidency that campus was modernized, installing running water, a sewer system, electricity, telephones, expanded campus significantly with the construction of Root Hall, which was named after Orrin Root and funded by Elihu Root. The Hall of Languages, which is now Benedict Hall, Truax Hall of Philosophy, which has since been demolished and is where Burke Library stands today. The Chemistry Building, now Blood Fitness Center, New South College, Soper Hall of Commons, Carnegie Residence Hall, and the James Library, which is now Christian Johnson. And Elihu Root, I should mention, Carnegie Residence Hall was also a direct result of Elihu Root because Andrew Carnegie was friends with Elihu Root and gave him $500,000 to build Carnegie Residence Hall. Stryker also changed the school colors to buff and blue, and also wrote Charisma. I don't know how much Elihu Root was involved in those two things, but he was very much so. They were kind of a dynamic duo, especially as board chair and president. They accomplished quite a lot. And on campus itself, there's quite a Root footprint. You have a historical marker outside of Buttrick, noting that Elihu Root was born in Buttrick Hall. You have the Spanish cannons, which are mounted in front of Salida House. I should have mentioned that Elihu Root was a Sigma Phi fraternity brother, and Salida House used to be Sigma Phi, and so these Spanish cannons, which were war booty from the Spanish-American War, were given to Hamilton College and parked in front of Salida House, thanks to Elihu. Of course, Root Glen, which I mentioned earlier, the Elihu Root House, which is not to be confused with the Homestead, which is next door. This house was built in 1817, and Root purchased it in 1893, and it's now home to the Registrar's Office and is also a national landmark. There's Root Hall of Sciences, as I just mentioned, was named after Orrin Root and funded by Elihu Root. There's Root Residence Hall, which is on the Kirkland side of campus. That was named after Grace Root, who was Elihu Root's daughter-in-law, who was also a Kirkland College trustee. You have the Molly Root House, which was originally a summer home for the Root family and now houses the art history department. And there's also a scholarship named in honor of Orrin Root Jr., It was established in 1948 as a bequest from Orrin Root III. So there's quite a significant legacy of Root internationally, nationally, and locally. But then you also have articles like this on the other side of the coin, I guess you could say. This article actually came out ironically 3 years to the day, March 8th, 2023. It's titled "The Shameful Imperialist Legacy of Elihu Root, Godfather of Corporate Law, How a Turn-of-the-Century New York City corporate lawyer became an unlikely Secretary of War, transforming the U.S. military into a brutally efficient force of oppression abroad." And the author of this, he grew up in central New York in Syracuse. He spent 5 years in the Navy as a submarine officer, and when he wrote this in 2023, was a student at Columbia Law School. So it's not like some political hack, I don't think, some hat to jog of trying to chop down Elihu Root's legacy. And there's a lot of merit to this. I mean, when Elihu Root was in private practice in New York, his clients were bankers and railroad barons, and he helped them consolidate their wealth using legal means. There's no suggestion that Elihu Root did anything illegal, but he understood the law and how to use the law to the benefit of his clients, like any lawyer does. And then when he was Secretary of War, he did make the military more efficient. He modernized it, as I said, and was able to use his law skills to enact these military and civilian governments over these recently claimed territories, and kind of ushered in this era of American colonialism and imperialism. So there's a lot to be said about this argument, and there's a lot of merit to it. And ironically, around the same time as this article came out in the fall, in 2023, March 2023, we started to have some discussions between myself and Professor Celeste Moore. She's an associate professor of history at Hamilton College, and we decided we wanted to form a partnership with the Levitt Center and Dean of Faculty to empower students to accomplish 3 distinct tasks: to process the Elihu Root Papers to best practices and industry standards, to create an exhibition that would go on display on the first floor of Burke Library, and 3, to host public programs and speaking engagements on topics related to Elihu Root. So let's break this down one by one. So the Elihu Root Papers at Hamilton College are just really a minority of his papers in general. We have about 30 boxes of materials, which is still significant, but the Library of Congress has 90 boxes. So how did this fourth of his papers, I should say, if you add it all up, wind up in the Hamilton College archives? Well, these 30 boxes were retained by Elihu Root III in the homestead and were gifted to Hamilton College in 1997. So in addition to these 30 boxes of manuscripts, we also have 15 linear feet of publications and also several linear feet of photographs. And the papers follow original order in which Elihu Root had arranged them. And it's arranged by format and subjects. And correspondence represent the largest series and are arranged into alphabetical and chronological subseries. So you may remember this from my last couple of talks, but processing collections is incredibly time-consuming and tedious. When they come to us, they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, different states of deterioration. And so this was by far the most time-consuming part of this project, was to process these papers. And I'm happy to say that it was all student-led. I coached them. Professor Moore also helped. And funding from the Levitt Center paid for their time in the archives. But it took 2 years and about 7 different students working during a couple hours here during the school term. And so it was incredible to see the students come together and work on this. You're going through every single document, removing rusted fasteners, you're making sure everything's in chronological or alphabetical order, you're unfolding things that are folded and then neatly labeling a folder, making sure everything is in the right place and preserved. This was incredible to see this work get done, and it also freed me up to do other things too. Having the students processing the Root Papers allowed me to process the Kirkland College records, which I talked about last year here at the Historical Society, and I also processed the Omar Pound Papers, which I presented on at the Ezra Pound International Conference. So it was really great to be able to delegate and empower students to do this work. And in total, there's 29 boxes of manuscripts that the students processed. And during that time, I was able to process the Omar Pound Papers and the Kirkland College records, which totaled 174 linear feet, which I wouldn't have been able to do if I didn't have students working on this project. So what are some highlights from the Elihu Root Papers? Well, Elihu Root grew up with the technology of photography. He was born a little bit too late to have a daguerreotype made of him. He was really only coming of age when ambrotypes were the fashion. We're fortunate to have an ambrotype of him, which is pictured here. He is wearing a Sigma Phi pin, so you have to remember he matriculated to Hamilton when he was 15 years old. So he definitely looks like a 15 or 16-year-old there. We also have tintypes of him. That's him there on the right in this group photo. And then we also have carte de visites, CDB photographs, album prints of him as well. And then of course we have the 20th century prints of him as well, silver gelatin, etc. We also have this really neat diary that he wrote when he went to London and to Germany in 1863. So he was still a student at Hamilton at the time. This was a summer trip in August and September. And he talks about his travels and who he met along the way, including Union and Confederate soldiers, a German man who was living in Idaho and going back home to visit his family. What's really cool is on this page here, he tabulated all the miles that it took to get from Clinton to Hamburg. And so he calculated it was over 4,000 miles that he had traveled. He talks about people that are in the first class cabins of his ship. It's really fascinating, and of course, during the Civil War, it would be a great thing to maybe get digitized one day and put online. We also have these really great pictures of the Root homestead and the Root farm, which eventually became Kirkland College. And this is a really cool picture. This is the Saunders, actually. This is Sylvia and Duncan, the two Saunders children, with their favorite Yorkie or Scotty dog right here. So again, kind of a crossover there with the Saunders. And this picture is Elihu with his son Edward, and they're looking southeast in 1920. This is what they call the shop, which was a part of the Hamilton College maintenance department. This is facing northwest towards College Hill Road, and looks like they're thrashing wheat, horse-drawn, mule-drawn thrasher. We have letters from President Roosevelt, about a couple dozen letters from President Roosevelt to Elihu Root during his time as Secretary of State in the cabinet. They're talking about a lot of the things that I discussed when he was Secretary of War, like overseeing the Philippines and Guam, and issues that they're having with Venezuela, that expressing that Roosevelt corollary. So the significant historic value there. These are really cool, and we've actually had students do projects surrounding these, but we have about a dozen photo albums that were presentation albums given by governments in Central and South America during that trip in 1906 that Root took as Secretary of State to recruit these countries to join the Hague Conference in 1907. And there are these beautiful presentation albums. The one on the left here is from Mexico. It's in this giant wood crate. There's actually two of them. There's one underneath here. It has this gold Mexican state symbol on the cover. And these pictures are remarkable. This is kind of from all different ones of them, but I believe this one's from the Mexico album here. There he's standing on his train. He took a train from DC all the way to Mexico. And so this is him on his train and getting off the boats. And crowds, and there's all sorts of amazing photos in there of locals greeting him, all the festivities surrounding his state visits. And then, of course, his Nobel Peace Prize in 1912. We have the diploma and the box that the diploma came in. And this is also a letter from the Nobel Prize Committee notifying him that he had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
Who signed that?
Oh, that's a good question. It was the president of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, second as secretary. Loveland, I think is it? Jay Loveland? That name rings a bell.
Now, is that the Peace Prize medal there, or just as part of the album?
That's a very good question. I don't know where his actual medal exists. It's not in our collection.
Okay.
There is, you can kind of see that there's a medal embossed on the box there, but it's not the actual, what you think of as the
Put around your neck?
Put around your neck medal, exactly. But then on the other side, again, talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly, in our collection we have a pamphlet that he wrote on the question of suffrage. I'll read this excerpt to you. I'm opposed to the granting of suffrage to women because I believe that it would be a loss to women, to all women, to every woman. And because I believe it would be an injury to the state, and to every man and every woman in the state. Into my judgment, there enters no element of the inferiority of women. It is not that woman is inferior to man, but it is that woman is different than man. That in the distribution of powers, the capacity of qualities our Maker has helped man adapted to the performance of certain functions in the economy of nature and society, and women adapted to the performance of other functions. One question to be determined in the discussion of the subject is whether the nature of woman is such that her taking upon her the performance of the functions implied in suffrage will leave her in the possession and the exercise of her highest powers, or will be an abandonment of those powers, and on entering upon a field in which, because of her differences from man, she is distinctly inferior. I have said that I thought suffrage would be a loss for women. I think so because suffrage implies not merely the casting of the ballot, the gentle and peaceful fall of the snowflake, but suffrage, if it means anything, means entering upon the field of political life, and politics is modified war. In politics, there is a struggle, strife, contention, bitterness, heartburning, excitement, agitation, everything which is adverse to the true character of woman. Woman rules today by the sweet and noble influences of her character. Put woman into the arena of conflict, and she abandons these great weapons which control the world, and she takes into her hands, feeble and nevertheless nerveless for strife, weapons with which she is unfamiliar and which she is unable to wield. Women in strife becomes hard, harsh, unlovable, repulsive. This is kind of a classic argument, like, oh, women are so pure, we don't want to defile the purity. Whenever they're arguing for rights. And it's kind of ironic that the land that he requested, that he had amassed over his lifetime, he requested to Hamilton became Kirkland College, of all places. And then his opposition to Filipino independence also is not the most lovely of legacies. And we have this letter here that came from Josephine Shaw Lowell. She's asking Root to join the Philippines Independence Committee. This is from 1904, so he was Secretary of State. And he replied, quote, I prefer not to become a member of the proposed Philippine Independence Committee for the reason that I can see no good purpose to be subserved by such a committee. I think it will do much hurt than good. There is a period in childhood during which the obligations of a guardian could not be performed without the power to control the child's actions. The people of the Philippine Islands are still in political childhood. The growth to the maturity which will make self-government possible must necessarily be slow. In the meantime, the power of control by the United States involved in the word sovereignty, quote, must continue. If it does not continue, the Filipinos will not advance, but will retrograde. I think the present agitation of the subject of independence in the Philippine Islands is calculated to do the very great harm, and I should regard the existence of such a committee in which you write me as a serious injury to the Philippine people. So, very interesting stances that he's taking on these
Now,
subjects.
wasn't Wilson at the same time that, because he was against women's suffrage too?
Wilson,
Was that
Woodrow
about
Wilson.
the same time period, when did Wilson?
Unfortunately, there's not a date on this publication. So yeah, your guess is as good as mine. But he opposed it, I think, his whole life. I don't think he ever came around to supporting suffrage. Now, so those are highlights from the papers that we have in the archive. The second phase of the project was to create an exhibition about Elihu Root using the papers. Celeste Moore appointed a student representative to be the point person for this exhibition. Her name is Mika Tortusa. She was class of 2025, and this was her senior project, was to work as a Levitt Center intern to work in the college archives to curate this exhibition. And this is a picture of her in front of her exhibition. There she's sitting right there. And this is Professor Mackenzie Cooley with her class, and Mika is leading a tour of the exhibition. And the exhibition contained a lot of the things that I just talked about, some of those highlights, including scrapbooks and photo albums, the ambrotype that I pointed out earlier. But Mika also went above and beyond, and she found things from the collection at the Library of Congress and from other sources as well. And the exhibition was titled A Legacy in Question. It wasn't really forcing that decision. It was an objective, allowing the viewer to look at the primary sources and come to a conclusion themselves. It wasn't really trying to choose one way or the other, whether Root's legacy is good, bad, or ugly. And I think that Mika did a great job at having that kind of objective stance in the exhibition. And then I should note that these two posters, make sure that these are from last year, so don't show up on March 31st or April 25th. But we also, as part of this, we brought two different speakers to campus as part of the third phase to bring scholars to campus to talk about Elihu Root and his legacy. The first speaker, Lavita Akibo, she is a historian that specializes in U.S. colonies in the Caribbean and the Pacific. And she's currently a professor at Yale. And she really was talking about her book, Imperial Materials, National Symbols in U.S. Colonial Empire. And it was really interesting because she was talking about things like stamps and currency and flags and those kind of things that blend into the background that you don't necessarily notice, and kind of almost subliminally you are seeing on a day-to-day basis, and how empires like the U.S. at the time that Root was part of these administrations was using these symbols to convey power over the new colonial possessions of the U.S. And then we also had Simeon Mann come and speak, who's a professor at UC San Diego. And he was talking about his area of specialty, which is the Philippines and the Pacific, and the legacy of the U.S. military presence in that region, and how military bases today still are impacting the local communities, and how the local communities are reacting to the presence of the U.S. military bases even today. So it's very interesting to have these scholars come and talk about these topics related to Elihu Root. I added some citations and further reading, including, so we have the Elihu Root Papers, which are now processed to best practices, and we have the finding aid published online, and that there's the manuscripts and the photographs there. And then the last one here I wanted to point out, this last citation here is a senior thesis that was done in 2024 using the Elihu Root Papers. In James Kaiser, class of 2024, he actually worked in the archives processing the papers, so he was hands-on working with the Root Papers, and he also traveled to DC and looked at the papers at the Library of Congress and he's about to graduate from Simmons with a master's in libraries and information science with a focus in archives. So he's really gotten bit by the bug, and I actually just heard from him this last week, touching base. So he still stays in touch, and it's really cool to see students progress in their young careers. So that's all I have, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
On the previous slide, you had that he was a Grand Master. What does that mean, and what was he Grand Master of?
Well, you know, like it's kind of a chess term, you know, like a grandmaster at chess. But he was just a whiz. He was a mastermind of military. Let me go back to that slide. He was a master of organization and modernization of. Let me go to the legacy. He was an administrative grandmaster. I mean, he modernized the U.S. government, especially the War Department as well as the State Department, really creating these career positions where he's professionalizing these institutions. He created the tests that these diplomats have to take in order to be a part of the State Department, for example. That's a good question.
Stepping back from these high-level concerns, just did he have any reconstruction of the homestead? Was it redone, expanded when he was there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'd have to look at, I don't know off the top of my head, I'd have to look at some records of when there were renovations. Currently the homestead is now in Anderson Canal at the alumni office.
And it
I
is
think
certainly
there were
larger now
additions.
than it was in his day.
Yeah, no, I think there have been additions to it. I think there was an addition added onto the back. If I'm not mistaken. Christian, do you know? More?
Yeah. The front of that building is pretty much intact to its period of construction. It was a tavern pre-homestead. I want to say the Ball Tavern. Same builder.
Lee's Tavern, right?
What is it?
Lee's
Sorry,
Tavern?
I screwed up the name. But same builder as my house and Saunders' house. And
Yeah.
everything else.
Yes.
And the,
Probably have more information here too.
the coved ballroom ceiling is still present on the second floor in the front of the house, but it's been subdivided into two different offices. But there's fireplaces at each end, and so the front of the house is pretty much true to the original.
And there was a garage, a barn that's now the financial, there's Carrie Leach's office, right? That's
Yeah.
next door. Yeah, I think
So
that was.
that was also an art center for a while.
Oh, yes, thank you, yes,
And
so.
it had that old stove in there.
Yeah, so
They did it.
in 1958 to 1982, it was the Root Art Center, named after Elihu Root's son, Edward Root, who was an early American art collector and helped start the Munson.
I just want to mention, go back to the matter of those two cannons.
Yes.
In front of the State House. Are they, I think I've looked at them, and they have, in their castings, it looks like something that they might have belonged to Napoleon's army. Is that?
I know that there's serial numbers on them, and there's also names attributed to them. I didn't write that in my notes what the names were, but they do have names on them, so I think there could be some research. They also originally came with the carriages, but I don't know what happened to the carriages. We have pictures of them. Now they're on stone-mounted pedestals. But yeah, that's a good question. I think there could be some more research done into tracing those cannons back to when they were originally forged. But yeah, we know that they made their way to campus through Elihu Root because he was Secretary of War during, soon after the Spanish-American War. Yeah, Mike.
In December, I was at the headquarters of the Council on Foreign Relations, and I found a bust of Elihu Root. And do you know if he had any involvement in that, or if it was just from his Secretary of State influence?
Yeah, I mean, he was involved in so many different organizations. Honestly, I tried to list, as many as I could, but there was too many to even go through, and I didn't want to kind of bore you guys with these minutiae details of every single organization that he was a part of. But I imagine he probably was involved at some degree, or just because he was a well-known political figure, Secretary of War, Secretary of State, possibly why they decided to create a bust of him.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, oh, I know that guy.
Yeah, please.
What do we know about his wife?
Oh, that's a good question. So his wife, Clara, was the daughter of a banker. So as I mentioned, he met his father-in-law at the Union League Club. His father-in-law was was head of a bank, and so he met her through his connection with the Union League Club, and I think he also may have been a lawyer also for the bank. May have represented the bank too. But in terms of like her day-to-day life, I didn't look into like what sources we have. I'm sure we have.
Well, how she felt about stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I'm sure that and that's one of the things that I loved about this project is that I can really delegate that research to the students and doing the processing and the exhibition work. It freed me to do those other things like Kirkland College and Omar Pound's papers, but I tried to study as much as I could for this talk, but that's kind of one of the double-edged swords, like, oh, you're empowering students and you're delegating tasks and you get more done, but then when you give talks, you're like, oh gosh, I wish I had the students here or someone with a PhD after their name who's studied the topic more thoroughly. That's a good question. No, in the back, and then you.
So my understanding was that Philip Jessup, who wrote the biography, was helped Elihu Root Jr. to decide which boxes should go to the Library of Congress and which should stay there.
Oh, I see.
There may have been a little bit of self-interest there.
Yeah.
With it, and that's what eventually gave the art.
Yeah, that's interesting that you brought up Jessup because he wrote the kind of formative biography of Elihu Root, but he was also a Hamilton grad and friends. So it's like, how critical is this biography? How is he really digging into the things that aren't necessarily so flattering of Elihu Root in that publication? I listed it as a source, but as for further reading, but I'm still sure there's still merit to it. But yeah, it's interesting, again, kind of forming your image and your legacy with a friend and fellow Hamiltonians. Kind of the old boys club at the time. Yeah, you had a question?
All I know is a Mrs. Root. Which Mrs. Root it was, I don't know. But the designing of where to put some of the trees and some of the plants.
Yes, yeah. And they were very involved in the Root family in general. They were very much involved in, they hired these curators in the mid-19th century to come in and help design campus's landscape. And also Beatrix Farrand, if you're familiar with Beatrix, she was also hired by Elihu Root to come up and do an assessment of Hamilton's campus. And she was like one of the first ever female landscape architects. And we have a file on her, we have her reports and the information about Elihu Root hiring her to come up and do an assessment. So they're very much so involved in the Root family in general with beautifying campus, planting trees, and so there's definitely that legacy that is left behind.
So which Mrs. Root is that, or both? There's the son,
Oh
there's
gosh, that's a good question.
Yeah, is that Mrs. Root? So
Mrs. Root, yeah, and that could be.
Grace Root was the most.
Yeah, it's probably Grace Root because she was also part of the. She was president of the Root Glen Foundation. She was one who.
Yeah.
She was president. Yeah, the Root Glen Foundation.
So she had,
the sons.
yes, Edward and Grace had the most influence on horticulture of all of the Roots.
Yes, and she's the one who technically gifted the land and the Root Glen, the land that became Kirkland College to Hamilton was really through her, but through a request of Elihu that might come to Hamilton. Yeah.
Do you have his will?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think we do. I think we have copies. I have to search the finding aid.
What did he invest in?
I think a lot. There are information about the securities he traded, if I'm remembering correctly. I think it was railroads, and definitely railroads. I'm trying to remember some of the other things. I have to go back and look. I don't remember specifically, but I think he, I don't know if there was insider trading going on, but he definitely invested well and did well for himself. He accumulated quite a massive wealth. I mean, it's also because he was representing in his private practice some major players like Andrew Carnegie and some of these other large railroad barons and bankers. This one here?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's like Alexander Hamilton conceived of and built the US economy, you know?
Yeah.
You have kind of a later iteration of that happening through the quasi-imperialist period of Root. So this leading to my question, is there any explicitly racial language? I mean, he clearly gave his opinions on women and their capacities. What about the new races being incorporated into the American empire or whatever?
Yeah, I did look into that. I mean, certainly with Puerto Rico, I think he was some racial divide going on there where he didn't, the Forker Act, he didn't want them to be citizens of the United States. He was against lynching them. So there is that saving grace. I think probably because he was a lawyer and those were extrajudicial activities, and he believed in the rule of law and due process and having a day in court. But I couldn't really find much about his position on Jim Crow. I mean, this is going on when Plessy versus Ferguson, and the Jim Crow laws are being enacted, and I couldn't find much on his position there. And that may be just because maybe he just said this is the law of the land, and I'm not going to try to oppose what's already enacted. So it would take a little bit more research to dig down deeper to see what his stance was on segregation. But he was, I know for certain, we have the documentation in the archives about his stance on lynching. Yeah, Kathy.
So there is a letter, one of the first black students who came in
Yes.
the 1920s.
That's a great point, yes.
Wrote a letter to Elihu Root, as the chairman of the board, complaining about some treatment.
Yeah, some treatment and also like.
He did write that, and I don't remember the details, but it was sort of, kind, but not really dealing with the issues.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And actually, that was in the exhibition, that letter
Okay.
from the several black students, some of the earliest black students, at least in Mass and Hamilton in the 1920s, there are several of them, and they wrote a joint letter to him as chairman of the board, going straight to the chairman of the board, which is also interesting, that there was a play that had used the N-word and just the way that they were treated on campus, and yeah, he basically wrote back like, sorry, this happened to you, but there's not really anything I can do about it. So it was kind of a non-stance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Kathy, for reminding me of
Yes.
that. Yeah.
On the slide you have before the legacy, in the picture there's a dog.
Yeah.
Was he an animal lover?
That's a very good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, I have to look and see if there's any mention of animals in any of the sources.
I think that he wasn't, because if he was, you'd know.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if I can think of any like family animals. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
That photo, that's in front of is that in front of the farmhouse or homestead?
That's a good question. I know that this picture was taken by Dick Wood, who was Richard Wood, who he took this picture, and he took the picture of Saunders, A.B. Saunders, who's a picture of him with the newspaper in his hand. He's kind of on the stoop.
Right.
I imagine this is probably his house at this point, because he at that point he had his house next door to the homestead. He had the Elihu Root house, but I'd have to match up, the door.
We could all go look.
Yeah, there definitely we could compare. We could find that out. Photo comparisons of both.
I'm pretty sure it is because of those leaded canes in the sidelights there.
Do you think it's Elihu Root's
Yeah.
house? Elihu Root house?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's that federal 1817
Nice.
house.
Great. It's 2:00. Perfect.
Thank